Today, we're going to explore a powerful and moving testimony of a near-death experience from a man whose life was forever changed after encountering Jesus. What sparked this experience? It all started on May 5, 2006, when I suffered from a kidney stone stuck on my right side. I had gone through similar episodes before and immediately recognized the familiar symptoms. How did you react at first? Initially, I thought I could just wait for the pain to pass, as I had during previous attacks. But this time, the pain didn't ease. It only got worse. What did you do next? I remember going to the emergency room calmly. I walked in and said simply, "I have a kidney stone." It was straightforward. From my past experiences, I knew what would happen. I'd be taken to a room, given morphine, and the pain would lessen. Did things go as planned at the hospital? Not exactly. The doctors found out I also had a kidney infection. They started me on antibiotics to fight the infection. They decided to keep me overnight in the hospital and scheduled a procedure for the next day. How did the operation go? The procedure itself went well. They broke up the stones as expected. But what we didn't realize then was that I was one of those rare cases where the antibiotics didn't manage to control the infection. Things were about to get very serious. What happened afterward? Once the stones were fragmented, the infection, this poison, spread into my bloodstream. This triggered sepsis. My body started shutting down, not just my vital organs, but everything, absolutely everything. How did you experience that moment? What really stood out was the almost complete absence of fear. When I realized I was dying as a born-again Christian, I firmly believed that death leads us straight to heaven. At that moment, all I could think about was, I'm going home. Can you describe what happened next? According to the medical records, I was declared clinically dead for about 1 hour and 45 minutes, but my experience during that time was completely different. I remember leaving my body, floating above the hospital floor, then quickly ascending into a boundless blue sky. It happened so fast that I still struggle to put the speed into words. How fast did you feel this ascent? There's a verse in the Bible that says, "To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord." That's exactly how it felt. I traveled at a speed beyond anything humans could imagine. My eyes barely closed when I was already in the sky. What did you see along the way? As I entered this realm, I saw what some people describe as the light at the end of the tunnel. But for me, it was more like a window. Though I'm not sure it actually was a window, that's just the best way to explain it. And how did you feel passing through this window? When I went through that window, I felt an indescribable peace. Everything was perfectly okay. No disturbances, no worries. It was calm, pure, and perfect. How did you feel in this new environment? What struck me most was the feeling of being truly at home, finally a part of something greater. Before this experience, I hadn't realized how disconnected I was from everything. But up there, I knew without a doubt that I was welcome. Everything surrounded me warmly. When you say everything, what exactly do you mean? I mean everything. Not just the presence of God, Jesus, or the Holy Spirit, but everything. Every part of that realm seemed joyful about my arrival. The trees, the flowers, even the air seemed to radiate happiness because I was there. It felt like total harmony, as if every element in that place had been waiting for me. What was your main desire at that moment? What I understood was that more than anything else, I had a profound desire to see Jesus Christ face to face. That was my greatest wish. I realized that heaven is not just a place you long to reach, but a place where you want to be with someone who means everything to you. For me, that someone was Jesus. Can you describe your journey to find Jesus? As I walked through a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees, I sensed that Jesus was somewhere among them. I felt this strong pull to keep moving forward, to cross the forest and find his presence. With every step, the trees seemed to part before me, almost as if they were guiding my way. How did you feel in that moment? It was as if nature itself was accompanying me, softly whispering, "He is going to see the king. He is going to see the king." That's exactly how it felt, as if even the trees knew what was about to happen. And then what happened? I eventually came upon a clearing, an open space where I saw Jesus. He stood just to my left, looking at a group of angels and what I would call the redeemed souls, people who had lived on earth and were now in heaven. What was your reaction when you saw Jesus for the first time? I remember that as soon as I saw him, I didn't immediately run to him. Instead, I was so overwhelmed that I dropped to my knees, unable to look anywhere but at his feet. Can you describe what you saw at that moment? He was facing a vast crowd, millions, perhaps billions of souls. I bent down to see part of his legs, but I never really saw his face right then, because I couldn't lift my eyes high enough. It was as if my entire being was focused on what he represented, without an urgent need to see his face. What did you feel in that moment? All I could whisper was, "You did this for me." At that very instant, I knew deep within that the only reason I was there, in that glorious place, was because of Jesus' sacrifice. A profound wave of gratitude swept over me. How did you express that gratitude? My heart was brimming with thankfulness. The only thing I could do was repeat, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over, carried away by a tide of gratitude that seemed endless. What feelings were you experiencing at that moment? I paused for a moment to reflect and thought, the only reason I'm here is because of what he did for me. I knew he had sacrificed himself for everyone, but in that instant, it felt like he had done it all just for me. It wasn't selfish, it was something very personal. He had created this entire paradise, this heaven for me. It was a deeply emotional realization. What happened next? I began to gaze at his body with unmatched awe. I started with his feet, then his ankles, and every part of him seemed to be saying one thing: "I love you." His calves, his knees, his hands, everything about him spoke of an immeasurable love for me. And when I finally saw his face, when I reached his face and our eyes met, it's one of those moments that still moves me today. He looked at me as if I had never sinned, as if I had never disobeyed. That gaze hit me profoundly. It made me feel like everything I had ever done wrong was wiped away, like it no longer mattered. How did you interpret that look? That look helped me understand what true forgiveness really is. It showed me, in a way I had never known before, that when God forgives, he forgets. I remembered passages from the Bible like Hebrews 8 and 10, which talk about this divine forgiveness, where God no longer recalls our wrongs. That's exactly what I felt in that look. Jesus, this eternal being, looked at me with pure love, as if my mistakes had never existed. It was a moment of deep understanding. My body was dead, but my soul, the true essence of who I am, will never die. This changed my perspective forever. What happened after that encounter with Jesus? After that profound moment, a kind of spiritual transfer, which I likened to a download, as you would do on a computer, Jesus looked at me gently and said, "No, it's not your time. Go back." Those words were simple but carried great power, and that's exactly how he said them. How did you react when Jesus asked you to come back? Strangely enough, I was okay with that. I wasn't disappointed or upset. On the contrary, I felt a profound peace. I remember that after those words, I didn't walk through the forest back to the entrance of heaven. I went through the forest, but it felt like I was no longer walking. It was more like I was floating, almost as if I was flying. Can you describe that sensation of flying? It wasn't anything like how we usually imagine flying. It felt much more natural. In fact, you could say, "I want to be 3 meters above the ground," and instantly you'd be there. It was that simple. To give you an idea, it was similar to the moment when Jesus walks on water in the Bible. There was no fear, only complete freedom. You could rise as high as you wanted, without the slightest hesitation. It was an incredible, almost unreal feeling. What happened when you arrived at the place where you entered heaven? When I reached the place I had come from, it wasn't like a door opened to let me out. It was more of a sensation, a deep knowing that the next step I took would bring me back to the physical world. I paused there for a moment, as if I wasn't quite ready yet. My body wasn't fully prepared to return, but strangely, I felt relieved that it wasn't ready. There was a certain calmness in that feeling. What were you doing at that moment? I then turned around with a slight smile and said yes. It was as if, right at that moment, the forest before me became a passage. I knew Jesus was on the other side, but I also felt I had the choice to explore elsewhere, to the left, toward another place. And that's when all of creation around me started to swell with joy. Can you describe what you felt when you saw creation around you? I saw majestic mountains, but they weren't ordinary mountains. They seemed alive, almost dancing like waves in the ocean. These mountains gently moved around me, creating a sensation of infinite harmony. It was a breathtaking sight. The mountains weren't just there, they were alive, full of life, and it felt like they were speaking to me. I thought, my God, this is incredible. It was a moment of pure wonder. How did you feel at that moment? What I felt was an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was ecstatic, not just because of the beauty I was witnessing, but also because, honestly, I thought I was going to stay there forever. Yet, at that moment, I knew I had to leave, even though it made me sad. It felt like saying goodbye to a place I wished I could have remained in forever. What happened next? I knew I had to return to Jesus, so I did. This time, I placed myself on a different side of him. But for reasons I didn't fully understand, I moved closer to him again. Then I returned to the spot where I had been before. I bowed to him again, and this time he spoke a bit more with me, sharing his thoughts about this mysterious place. Can you describe what you felt or saw during that encounter? I clearly remember the light radiating from Jesus. I hadn't mentioned it the first time, but there was an intense brightness coming from him, spreading around me and enveloping me deeply. The feeling was beyond words. It was as if everything around me was bathed in an indescribable beauty. And what happened after that second encounter? After that moment of closeness, Jesus looked at me again. His eyes, full of love and calm, met mine. Then he gently said, "It's not your time. Go back." Go back? How did you respond this time? This time, hearing those words, I felt something different. I walked through the trees again to the spot where I'd stopped before. It felt like just one more step would bring me back to my physical body. But suddenly, a sensation came over me, and I knew for sure my body wasn't ready for the transition yet. I told myself, I will stay. Izu, did you have another chance to explore? Yes, this time, instead of turning left as I did the first time, I chose to go right toward a different forest. There, I discovered something amazing, a landscape filled with water, rivers, and fountains. I didn't know why I was there, but the place had a clear, flowing energy, almost as if the water was a natural extension of the surroundings. What was the environment like on this side? The dominant color was a deep blue, but not an ordinary blue. The colors in this place were much more vibrant and intense than anything I had ever seen. I traveled through this space witnessing lived scenes, experiencing new sensations, and even observing many animals, especially birds flying in every direction. It was fascinating to see how life seemed to flow so completely and naturally. And what happened after this exploration? Finally, I returned to Jesus, and it felt as if everything fell into place. These beings and sensations had always been around me, but I hadn't recognized them until that moment. Back in the place where I had been before, I looked at his feet, and as I lifted my gaze, I saw my family on the other side of him. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, revealing something that had always been present, but that I hadn't fully noticed until then. How did you feel when you saw your family? I saw my grandmother Marie, who was at the forefront of the group. She was there very prominent. Behind her, I could see other family members, and right behind them, even more, generation after generation. All those who, in one way or another, were connected to Jesus Christ and the Father. They came toward me, greeting me in a deeply emotional and moving way. Have you ever seen your family at another point during your experience? Looking back now, I know my family was present the first 2 times I was with Jesus. They were there, but at the time, I was so focused on Jesus that I didn't pay attention to them. However, this time, something urged me to look at them and then to observe them more consciously and attentively. How would you describe their appearance? It's hard to put into words what people look like in heaven, especially since time doesn't exist there as we understand it. I would say they radiated light. Each of them had a broad smile, an expression of pure joy. Reflecting on this, I thought, wow, I saw my entire family in heaven, smiling and happy. I realized I had never seen anything like it on earth. The way everyone loved one another, the tenderness and harmony, it was truly beautiful. Has this experience changed how you view family in heaven? Yes, it has. Before, I imagined that we as God's children would be one big united family in heaven, all together. But experiencing this, I understood that family is something very important to God. I realized that for Him, family bonds are deeply precious. Were you surprised by anyone you saw there? Yes, there were people I never would have expected to see in heaven. I had my own ideas about who should or shouldn't be there, based on my personal opinions. But I discovered that while I had my expectations, God has His own criteria. Those I thought didn't meet the standard were there because God accepted them, even if I hadn't judged them in the same way. What do you think is God's criterion? God's criterion is simple: to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. That's the only requirement He asks to be with Him in heaven. And what happened after that moment with your family? After the encounter with my family, I experienced an indescribable sense of harmony with all of heaven. I could feel God's presence and the joy of everyone around me, praising and worshiping Him. It was overwhelming. But suddenly Jesus looked at me and with calm firmness said, "No, this is not your time. Go back." How did you respond to that? When He said that, I felt like everything around me was parting, making space for that command to come through. It was as if the entire universe was saying, "He's not speaking to me, He's speaking to you." I felt like a soldier. I had a strong sense of discipline and readiness, like being in the Air Force, prepared to carry out a mission. My thought was simply, "Yes, my Lord," and I got ready to leave. I sensed that Jesus was telling me without words that I was needed more here in this world than up there. At that moment, did anyone else speak to you? Yes, my grandmother Mary was there. And while Jesus was telling me it wasn't my time, she looked at me and said, "Bring as many of us as you can." She was referring to my entire family here on earth. This message was very powerful and profound for me. What did you do next? After that, I bowed before Jesus as a sign of respect and acceptance. Then I crossed the trees again. I reached what looked like the edge of heaven. I took a step, and with that gesture I returned to this world. How did you feel upon returning? I felt a great sadness. It was like a baby crying desperately. I remember floating back into the hospital room, seeing my body on the bed, where the medical team had already stopped trying to resuscitate me. They were packing up the equipment, and the doctor was signing my death certificate. At that moment, it was a shock to come back to this physical reality after experiencing such peace. Did you have a sense of how earthly relationships might continue or change in heaven? Yes, I sensed something profound. When I saw my family in heaven, I immediately recognized them, and there was a deep connection with each of them. But the relationship was different from what we have here on earth. It was a pure, perfect connection without any tension, misunderstanding, or pain that might exist in our earthly relationships. Everyone was connecting with one another through their relationship with God, and that transformed everything. You mentioned that you didn't want to return at first. Can you tell us more about your return to the body? Yes, at first I really didn't want to come back, but after my grandmother asked me to bring as many of us as possible, something awakened in me. I knew I had a mission to fulfill. Leaving the heaven, I felt an acceleration, as if I were traveling at an incredible speed, similar to what I had felt when I entered. When I returned to the hospital room, I saw my body there, lying down. The medical team had already stopped resuscitation attempts and the doctor was signing the death certificate. I was suspended above my body for a moment, feeling the emptiness of the situation. Then, suddenly, I was pulled back into it. What happened when you returned to your body? As soon as I came back, the heart monitor started beeping, and the medical team was surprised. They quickly resumed treatment and intubated me, helping me breathe again. It was a stark contrast to the peace and serenity I had experienced in heaven. How did you feel physically after this experience? Physically, I was extremely weak. My body had already endured so much, and I had been clinically dead for nearly an hour and a half. My recovery was slow and difficult, but emotionally and spiritually, I felt renewed, filled with a deep sense of purpose and a conviction that something greater awaited me. How has this experience changed your life? This experience completely transformed my outlook on life, death, and eternity. Today I live with the awareness that our time on earth is incredibly brief compared to eternity, and that every moment should be lived with intention. I'm now more focused on loving others, sharing God's message of love, and living in a way that reflects that love. I no longer fear death, yet I've also learned to treasure the gift of life and the purpose God has for me while I'm here. You mentioned that you now live with a greater sense of purpose. Could you tell us more about that? Yes, absolutely. After my experience in heaven and the message I received from my grandmother to bring as many people as possible, I feel a deep responsibility to share my story. I want people to understand the reality of heaven, God's love, and the impact our actions here on earth have on eternity. Now I live aware that what we do here has eternal consequences, and I strive to live accordingly. Has your near-death experience affected your relationships with others? Yes, profoundly. Now, I see each person as someone deeply loved by God. Just as I experienced His love for me, this perception has made me more patient, more compassionate, and has given me a stronger desire to share with others the love I encountered in heaven. I've also learned to value family relationships even more. I realize that these connections are not just important here, but have eternal significance. You mentioned seeing animals in heaven. Can you tell us more about that? Yes, I was surprised to see so many animals in heaven. They were everywhere, and it seemed like each one had a special place in that environment. I saw animals I recognized from Earth, but also creatures I had never seen before. They all appeared to live in perfect harmony with one another and with everything around them. This made me realize how much God cares for all of His creation, not just for human beings. That's fascinating. Did you interact with any of these animals? No, I didn't interact directly with the animals. I was very focused on Jesus, then on my family. Although I didn't have direct contact with them, I felt a joy and peace radiating from every being, just like from everything in heaven. It seemed that all, including the animals, were praising God in their own way, in perfect harmony with the Creator. You spoke of the beauty of heaven. Can you describe it in detail? It's really difficult because human words can't do it justice. The colors were so vibrant, nothing like anything we know here. The light was everywhere, but it wasn't harsh. It was soft, warm, and inviting. Everything around seemed alive in a way that's hard to explain. The trees, the flowers, even what looked like inanimate objects had their own energy, and there was perfect harmony in all of it. There was neither decay nor imperfection. The beauty was beyond anything I could have imagined, like a vision of pure perfection. You mentioned that Jesus shared information with you. Can you explain what you mean by that? It's hard to describe exactly, but at one point, it felt like I just knew certain things. It wasn't as if he was speaking to me with words, but rather as if he was directly transmitting knowledge to my mind or soul. I understood many things about God, heaven, life, and even about myself, things I had never fully grasped before. Some of that knowledge faded when I returned to my body, but much of it stayed with me. It was like a kind of spiritual download. Can you share some of the insights you gained during this download? One of the greatest revelations I received was about God's love. I thought I understood what His love for us meant, but what I experienced was far deeper than I could have imagined. I also gained insights into the nature of eternity, the significance of the choices we make on earth, and the reality of spiritual warfare. Some of what I learned is hard to put into words because these are concepts that our earthly minds simply can't fully comprehend. You mentioned spiritual warfare. Could you elaborate on that? Yes, after this experience, I became much more aware of the spiritual forces at work in the world, both the forces of good and those of evil. I realized that many of the struggles and challenges we face have a spiritual dimension, something we often overlook or fail to recognize. This insight motivated me to be more purposeful in my prayers and to seek spiritual protection by putting on what the Bible calls the full armor of God. I felt it was essential to be spiritually prepared to face the forces influencing our lives. Has this experience changed the way you see death? Yes, profoundly. Now, I'm no longer afraid of death. I understand that it isn't the end, but a transition to something far more beautiful than we can imagine. That doesn't mean I'm eager to die, because I believe God has a purpose for me here, and I want to fulfill that mission. Still, when my time comes, I feel at peace knowing I will return to heaven. Has your perspective on time changed? Definitely. In heaven, time didn't exist the way we experience it on earth. Everything was eternally present, existing in a perpetual now. It made me realize that our struggles here are actually temporary in the grand scheme of eternity, and it made me more aware of the importance of every moment. Every second holds eternal value. You mentioned seeing people in heaven whom you didn't expect to see. How did that affect your view of salvation? It made me much less judgmental. I understood that God's grace and mercy are far greater than we can imagine. Salvation isn't about following perfect rules, but about accepting Jesus and His sacrifice for us. This taught me to be more humble and careful when judging others' spiritual state, reminding me that only God truly knows each person's heart. Can you explain more about this deep sense of purpose you feel now? Of course. After my experience in heaven and my grandmother's message to bring as many as possible with us, I feel an immense responsibility to share my story. I know that every action here has eternal consequences, and I strive to live each day aware that every choice I make can impact someone's spiritual future. I want to help people understand the reality of heaven and God's love. Has your near-death experience affected your relationships with others? Yes, profoundly. Now I see each person as someone deeply loved by God. Just as I experienced His love for me, it has made me more patient, more compassionate, and more eager to share that love with others. Also, I have learned to value my family relationships more deeply, knowing how important those bonds are, not just here, but also for eternity. You mentioned the beauty of heaven. Can you describe it in detail? It's difficult because words don't do it justice. The colors were more vibrant than anything I've ever seen. The light was everywhere, but not harsh or glaring. It was soft, warm, and welcoming. Everything felt alive in a way I can't fully explain. The trees, the flowers, even things that seemed inanimate, all had their own energy. There was perfect harmony, without decay or imperfection. It was a beauty beyond my comprehension. You mentioned spiritual warfare. Can you explain that? Yes, I became much more aware of the spiritual forces at work, both good and evil. I realized that many of our struggles on earth have a spiritual dimension that we often overlook. This insight made me more intentional in my prayer life and more diligent in seeking spiritual protection by putting on what the Bible calls the full armor of God. Spiritual warfare is a reality we need to recognize and prepare to face. Has this experience affected your prayer life? Yes, profoundly. Prayer has become much more real and essential to me. Having experienced God's presence so intensely in heaven, I now see prayer as a direct way to communicate with a loving Father. I am more open, more honest, and more confident in my prayers, knowing that God hears me and is always near. You said everything in heaven seemed to welcome you. Can you describe that feeling? It was the greatest feeling of belonging I have ever known. On earth, we often feel like we don't belong or that we're not enough. But in heaven, those feelings simply didn't exist. From the grass beneath my feet to the air around me, everything seemed to say, "You belong here. We're glad you're here." It was an overwhelming sense of acceptance, of being unconditionally loved. Did this experience change how you see your body? Yes, it changed that a lot. While the physical body is important, I realized it is just a temporary vessel for our eternal spirit. In heaven, I felt more myself than ever, more whole, more at peace. It made me less concerned about physical appearance and more focused on nurturing my spirit, because that's what truly defines me. You mentioned the colors in heaven were more vibrant. Can you describe that further? It's hard to describe because the colors were beyond anything we can comprehend. Imagine the most vibrant blue you've ever seen in the sky. That blue would seem dull in comparison. There were colors I had never seen before, colors that don't exist in our earthly spectrum. Everything seemed to glow from within, as if the colors were radiating from an internal light. It was impossible to describe using the words we have here. Did you get a sense of the size or expanse of the sky? Yes, the sky felt both intimate and infinite. When I was with Jesus or my family, everything felt very personal and close. But there was also a sense of vastness, as if the sky stretched endlessly in all directions. Did you see other examples of nature behaving differently? It was large enough to accommodate everyone in perfect harmony, without ever feeling crowded. It seemed as vast as needed for everything to fit together perfectly. You spoke of the trees that opened before you. Yes, everything in the sky seemed alive, with a consciousness focused on praising God. The mountains moved like gentle waves. The light seemed to have its own intelligence, surrounding me with gentle, loving care. Even what we call inanimate objects seemed aware of their existence, with a purpose, to worship and glorify God. Did you get a sense of the experiences of other people in the sky? Although I was very focused on my own experience, I felt that everyone there shared the same joy, peace, and love. It was as if each person had a unique and perfect experience, yet all were united in worshiping God, in a state of pure joy and love. This made me realize that in the sky, everyone is in perfect harmony with divine design. You mentioned that you didn't want to come back. How did you come to terms with returning to Earth? At first it was difficult. The sky is so perfect, so beautiful, that part of me didn't want to leave. But knowing that God had a greater purpose for me in sending me back brought me peace. Today, I see my life on earth as a mission to share what I experienced and help others prepare for eternity. This purpose strengthens me and gives meaning to every day. How has your experience affected your view of worship? Worship in heaven wasn't just something done, it was a continuous state of being. It was an expression of pure love and joy directed toward God. Everything and everyone praised endlessly, not out of obligation, but from genuine, spontaneous joy. This completely changed how I see worship. Here on earth, I now approach worship with greater enthusiasm and depth, seeking a more authentic and intimate relationship with God. Were you aware of events on earth while you were in heaven? No. While I was in heaven, I was fully immersed in the experience and completely unaware of what was happening on earth or the condition of my body. It was only when Jesus told me that it wasn't my time to return yet that I realized I was about to come back. Has your experience changed how you view your work or daily activities? Yes, it has completely transformed my outlook. Now, I see everything I do as an opportunity to bring a piece of heaven to earth. Whether at work, in interactions with others, or even in the simplest daily tasks, I try to approach them with the love and joy I experienced in heaven. This makes me more intentional with my time and resources, always aiming to make an eternal impact with my choices. Did you get a sense of how Earth's prayers are received in heaven? Although I didn't see prayers being received directly, I sensed a constant connection between heaven and earth. God is deeply involved in people's lives here, and prayer feels like a powerful link between us and heaven. I felt that God listens to and responds to our prayers with profound compassion. Did you gain insights into the role of angels? Yes, I gained a clearer understanding of the role angels play. They are constantly engaged in worship and carrying out God's will. I realize that angels have a far greater role in our lives than we often realize. Always acting under divine authority, they are messengers and helpers who work to accomplish God's purposes. How has your experience impacted your relationships with non-believers? My experience has given me a greater sense of urgency to share my faith, but also more patience and love for those who do not believe. I now understand that each person's journey is unique and that God's love extends to everyone, no matter where they are in their spiritual path. I aim to share my experience in a way that encourages people to explore the truth while respecting their free will. Have you gained an understanding of the nature of free will and God's sovereignty? Yes, that's a profound question. I've come to realize that God's sovereignty and human free will are intertwined in a way that's hard for us to fully grasp with our limited perspective. God gives us the freedom to make genuine choices, even though He knows that our decisions can lead to painful consequences. Yet He is always working to bring good out of everything, even the most difficult situations. Have you gained an understanding of the nature of evil or the presence of suffering in the world? Although I haven't experienced evil in heaven, the contrast between heaven and earth has helped me better understand the nature of evil. Evil is essentially the absence of God's goodness, a distortion of His perfect plan. The perfection and love of God in heaven have made the reality of evil and suffering on earth even clearer. This understanding has strengthened me in recognizing the importance of bringing God's light into the darkness of this world. How has your near-death experience affected your fear of death or dying? Now death no longer frightens me. I understand that death is not the end, but a transition to something infinitely more beautiful. This doesn't mean I'm eager to die, as I know God has a purpose for me here. But when my time comes, I will welcome it in peace, knowing what awaits me on the other side. What message would you like people to take away from your experience? I want people to know that God's love for them is far greater than they can imagine. Heaven is real, and it is more beautiful and perfect than we can comprehend. Our choices here have eternal significance. The most important thing to understand is that a relationship with Jesus prepares us for eternity. It's not about being perfect or following a strict set of rules, but about accepting His love and forgiveness. Heaven is open to everyone who receives God's grace. What an incredible and profound experience. The story of your near-death experience that you shared is truly moving and invites us to reflect on the purpose of life, God's love, and what lies beyond this world. The message of love, hope, and the importance of living with an eternal perspective is a powerful reminder for all of us. Thank you for trusting me with your journey. It's a testimony that not only inspires, but also urges us to consider what truly matters. May many people be touched by this story, and like you, seek a deeper connection with God. And to everyone watching, if this message of love and eternity has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, share, and explore the quest for peace and divine purpose. Thank you for this meaningful exchange, and until the next moving story,